All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and thank you for joining us. Welcome to another edition of Spring Office Hours. I'm your host, Dan Vega. Joined with me, as always, is my friend DaShaun Carter. DaShaun, how are you, my friend?
I'm excited. Things are good.
Yeah,
It's a great time to be a developer.
it always is, but especially right now. And that is part of our talk for today, our topic. Spring Boot 3.0 release candidate 1 was just released, and we're going to talk about that today, as well as what's new in the Spring world, as well as answering any questions you might have, whether it's about Spring Boot 3 or some project you're working on. Bring those questions. This is a great place to ask them. We'll see if we can't get them answered. So, how are you? Anything interesting happening?
Let's see. We are in between sports, so kids aren't doing as much. So now they're like, I don't know what to do with my hands in the evenings. Um, and we're looking right. It's just like right around the corner at a bunch of new releases. A really exciting new time to be a Spring developer. And yeah, I'm getting ready for a little bit of travel. I might swing by your way. Like
Ooh,
if I just show up at your door, just let me in.
that would be awesome. Let's do that. Yeah, I did a little traveling too. I told you we talked before. I went to North Carolina this past weekend for a friend's wedding. It was about the same. I was hoping it would be a little bit warmer than Cleveland, but it was about the same temperature. But I did get to run next to the ocean, which is one of my favorite things to do in the world. So anytime I get a chance to do that, I always take that up. So that was great. Good to be back, refreshed. And I was telling my wife this. I felt like an adult this weekend because I went by myself because we didn't have anybody to watch the kids. So I kind of went solo, but I was able to read a couple books, and I was like, oh man, I forgot how much I love books because I've just had kids and COVID. Like, over the last 2 years, we've been locked in this house. I just haven't had any chance to do that. So it's like, oh, it's nice to be back and reading books. So yeah, just doing that stuff. I'm excited about Spring One. That's why we have this new background here that you might be able to see.
So
Spring
nice.
One. We got a couple banners from the marketing team, so I figured I'd put them to use. Spring One's, oh my gosh, a little over a month away. Wow, that is crazy and a little bit frightening because we have a lot of content to work on for that. So
We have a lot of work to do.
we got to touch some things up and get some things, put a bow on a couple things as we get closer to that. So
But it's so fun. It's so exciting. This week has been, uh, it's just been heads down and fun. Like, oh, there's so much, and there's so much work that we can do, and there's so much cool stuff that we can show. Um, yeah, sometimes I'm just in that mode where I've been losing track of time quite a bit these past days, weeks.
yeah, so much. And I think we talked a little bit about it last week, but I'm in the same boat everybody else is out there. Even though I get to do this every single day, I'm just trying to like learn and catch up on some of these technologies. Me and our coworker Mario are working on an article or a guide for the Tanzu Developer Center called Serverless Spring, and it really has to focus on, hey, if I want to write serverless functions and deploy them out into the cloud, whether it's AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, how can I use the Spring programming model to do that? And, with Spring Boot 3 coming out this last week, that gives me another thing to kind of look at is like, okay, the one downside to building, probably the only downside, I saw a Twitter thread going on this earlier today and I didn't jump in. I should have, but I had to get caught up for this. But the only downside to kind of serverless apps on the JVM is that cold startup time. And now we're removing that. That was really the only problem. The only kind of knock you would if you were going to deploy something out to, say, a serverless function. So just having fun building some applications, some demos in there, getting ready to get this guide up. So I'm excited. Stay tuned for that. That should be up hopefully next week. So we might be able to talk a little bit about that next week, as well
Awesome.
as we have a special guest next week.
Oh yes, yes we do.
We
Our
are
good
going
friend
to
Ted.
have our friend Ted on, testing with Ted, and we're going to talk all about testing next week. So I think we're sure of next week. So next week testing with Ted, we'll talk all about testing. So bring your testing questions. We'll get his philosophy. I always like getting other developers' philosophy on testing because I know that it really changes between organizations and even individuals. Like, what amount of functional tests should I write, or integration tests, or unit tests? What are the most relevant tests to me? Those are questions that I think you get a lot of different answers for. So I'm interested, and I know Ted is very opinionated on it. So I'm excited to hear his thoughts on that. And then hopefully the following week we'll do some serverless stuff. So, and then you're in Spain.
I'm going to be in Spain for VMware Explore Europe. I want to just kind of touch on this serverless talk. I apologize if I'm taking off track here, but I want to touch on this. I don't really come up with hot takes very often.
All right.
And I don't have like super new or anything, but I'm going to show just this concept. This one. One of the things that you may or may not have heard, like we pay that cost for the startup time, but then you have a bunch of patterns around how to keep things up, keep some small set of these serverless functions up and running, and it a lot it takes a lot of work, right? There's lots of patterns.
Yep. Are you? Do you want to share your screen? Is that what you're telling me?
Sorry, yeah. Sorry. Let's add that. This idea where we said, hey, this takes too long. And I don't say we, I say this is kind of opinions.
Yeah, I know.
But then there's lots of these patterns to like keep things alive. And my pattern for if I need to be up and running and have something alive, I'm going to leave my JVM up because my JVM is going to handle a lot more connections, if you will, for that, RESTful API or et cetera. And I don't have to worry about these extra patterns. And then I can have dual deployments. I can do a Spring Boot image without the native, and I can do a Spring Boot image with native, and I can literally deploy both of these from the same code base without having to do all this extra work around patterns for keeping things alive. I can have 1 or 2 instances, whatever your keep alive baseline is, and then you can scale up and down quickly with the extra, with the serverless pieces. And it's not that big of a change versus, we got to convert everything to serverless and everything's got to be functions, and then you got to learn all these new things for patterns on how to keep things up and dealing with that initial load or the periodic load that comes and goes. This is a great way to handle that initial load and scale as needed.
Yeah, and it's a great point because, again, serverless is kind of new to me. I've done stuff in the past, but, for the most part, especially serverless in Spring is new to me. And during my tests, I threw a bunch of load at these functions just to kind of see for myself what was going on. And as you said, the cold start was where the big spike is. But once it was running, like there's no problem running a huge, complex application, algorithms, everything on the JVM is fine. It's just that initial spike is what you do need to get rid of, because that's part of the story with serverless, right? Like, it's not something that needs to be running all day long, responding to requests. If it was, you would probably just stand it up as a normal application somewhere else, right?
Yep.
So yeah, that is part of the article that we're writing, is understanding the why, the when, the what. You really have to answer those questions before you just say, okay, now I'm going to use this new technology.
Yeah, and it's been around for a while. Like it's the things that are coming with Spring Boot 3. We talked about it last time. A lot of it is also because of all the advancements made with GraalVM. GraalVM has come a long way. And now it's really magical how the teams are actually working together. For those of you that went to Oracle Cloud World, that was last week. There's
Java 1
of
was too. Yeah.
Java 1, Oracle. Those are kind of the same.
They're both in Vegas too. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think they're the same thing. Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of collaboration happening. There's a lot of cool things that are happening. For the community, by the community.
It's funny you brought that up. I bring that up too. I told you part of my trip down was I was going to download a bunch of talks because I have the YouTube Red, so I can like download a video from YouTube and watch it on a plane or whatever. I did end up watching. There were a couple talks at Devox about GraalVM, and Thomas, his last name has escaped me, the lead of GraalVM. He had a talk on it, and surprisingly, he said that the JIT part of GraalVM is getting very, very close to native, performance.
Mhm.
So they're starting to blur that line there, which is like really exciting. But
Yeah, so
anyways,
this
I'll see if I can put that in the show notes. The talk, there's two talks from Devox. One from the Spring team, Brian and Stefan on AOT processing and how that works in Spring, and then from the GraalVM team and just how GraalVM works. Those two combined really kind of open up my eyes to a few things.
yeah, I'm gonna see. I got this one. This is the one from Stefan and Brian. I'll put that into the chat. And that's a good one to check out. But yeah, we talked about it a couple episodes ago. When I think of GraalVM, it is just a JVM. It's a JDK. You can use it just like you're using Liberica or your other hotspot or whatever. And you have two modes. I can decide to do the just in time, the traditional approach, or I can do the ahead of time compilation. And there's like that trade-off, right? For development, and it's getting faster. You probably saw, the ahead of time compilation is getting much faster than it has been, especially if you've got one of the newer processors. But there's trade-offs, and for a lot of workloads, different JVMs provide different capabilities. It's just like, hey, I'm going to choose this cloud for this reason because it does this thing better. I'm going to choose this JVM, this JDK for this reason because it does this thing better for my workloads. And sometimes we take those things for granted. Like sometimes there is an actual reason to choose one versus the other. And yeah, it's worth the exercise to understand. And with everything else, the GraalVM option has just been improving. It has been better. Over the years, it's continuing to improve, and the performance is amazing.
Yeah. All right, let's get, we have a couple of comments and questions. We'll kind of look at these before we get into the calendar stuff. So I wanted to touch on this one. Is it possible to get a code walkthrough from a beginner level about Spring authorization server? Yeah, so we can't do it today. That would probably take us 30 to 40 minutes. There's a lot involved in that. But the exciting thing about Spring Boot 3.0, RC1, is now that Spring authorization server has now hit 1.0 RC1, I believe, or will be. We'll look at the calendar in a second. But those two are lining up. So OAuth 2, like the OAuth 2 resource authorization server kind of went away from Spring, right? And now we have this new authorization server, which is it's really great project. There's some really great things you can do with it. But there's, it's an authorization. It's not just a simple demo. So we can't do that today, but it is on my list of things to do for my YouTube channel. So I will see if I can kind of move that up the priority stack and try and get something out on that. So thank you for that. Hello, Lazaro. Thank you for joining us. Samit, really excited to see the new features around 3.0, specifically native image with GraalVM support. Exactly. But unfortunately, I got to know today GraalVM native image support is not there with Webflux and Netty. Can you share when we will expect this to be available, please? I didn't know that was a thing, DaShaun. Is that? I don't think so.
I think that might be a not a thing, because I want to maybe get more info here.
Yeah, let us look into that. I have all the demos I've built for 3.0, at least on RC1. those are all Spring MVC apps. It's usually just my kind of default go-to. So I don't think that's the case. We'll look into that, but we'll take a look at that. To be honest, why do we use use the serverless term where we actually do have server apps, or am I missing something?
I think I know. To back up, I think I know the answer on this one.
Okay.
It's not that the GraalVM native image support's not there. It's the build packs. It's that the build packs. Oops, I see. I think I have a. Yeah, it's the build packs issue. So it's not necessarily making the native image. It's making the native image with the build packs. And I have a little Twitter response here that I think I can. Do.
So can we create a native executable without the build packs then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll throw this in.
Okay.
But yeah, these are all things that are going to be coming.
So yeah, the term serverless, as you know, does not mean there's no servers. In fact, you are just renting servers. Serverless just really means you don't have to care about the serverless. You don't have to provision them. You get these servers that are working and provisioned for you out of the box. All you really care about is the code that you're writing. And again, it's not for, like everything we talk about, it depends. It's not for every workload. So stay tuned for that article in this guide that we're putting out on the TNZ Developer Center for free. By the way, it really kind of walks you through like, okay, what is a serverless function? What are the different use cases for it? In there, we kind of lay out the 5 to 7 things that we think are really good use cases for that. And then we build a simple serverless function together and deploy it to something like AWS. So stay tuned for that. Hello, everyone. Hello. Our good friend is joining us again. Thank you. DaShaun, maybe you could take this one.
Spring OpenFane under reactive support section. However, that's a library maintained by privately owned organization. I don't know the answer on this. Please hold.
Can you explain what is GraalVM and what will that allow us to do? Yeah, so I'll get into sharing my screen in a little bit, and maybe we could jump over to the GraalVM website. But essentially what this is allowing us to do in Spring Boot 3 is compile our apps down to a native executable. So normally when you run, maybe when you build an application, so today you're working on a Spring application, and maybe it's a REST app, and at the end of the day, you build a jar file. So you have this Uber jar that has like the embedded Tomcat in it and all the web support and Jackson and everything that comes with kind of building a web app. You have this jar file, right? You deploy this jar to the cloud. That jar needs the Java runtime environment available to go ahead and run it, right? Like you need the JRE there to be able to execute that bytecode. That kind of takes us back to the beginning of Java, right? Like write once, run everywhere. So that's normally how we build apps. But what this native executable does is target the platform that you're going to be running on. So if I'm running this on a particular Linux box, I am compiling an application down to code that can run on that box without the JRE in place. So I no longer need Java, right? So that's essentially what it's doing. There's a lot more involved in that, obviously, but you get this native executable, and then it has some benefits to it. It's smaller, it takes up less memory. I can start up much faster because of all the things it doesn't need to do at startup time. And then obviously there are workloads that, may be better suited for the Java runtime environment. But that's kind of what we can talk about today as we go on.
Yeah. So, and the trade-offs, right? The amount of time it takes, it's going to go through all the branches and figure things out. But the output is going to be smaller. It's native to the operating system and the CPU architecture. So now this developer ecosystem, we're in this interesting point where more and more of us are developing on ARM64. CPUs, ARM64 architecture. So already we're in this spot where, hey, maybe the thing that I want to deliver, I want to get the value out of that different CPU architecture versus that one size fits all with bytecode. So there are, again, that's just another one of those trade-offs, but it gives you the option. Chromium gives you the option to do a regular JVM with just-in-time compiling or going down that path of ahead of time compilation.
Spring Boot 3, is it compatible with Java 8? Sadly, it's
No.
not. Well, I don't know if that's sadly, to be honest.
Nope. No, it's
We
not.
are on, you need to be running Java 17 to use Spring Boot 3. And again, I think this has been talked about over and over. At the time it was announced, it was a little bit aggressive. Hey, we're going to make you run at least Java 17. But as we sit here today, Java 19 has been released. Java 20 is already in the works. So we're already kind of behind. So no, you need to be on Java 17 to use Spring Boot 3.
I like the way that Josh explains that. Is it's like, hey, we had to rebase in order to support some of these new features. In order to move forward with Spring, we kind of had to say, hey, we can't support all of these new cool things and continue to move forward unless we say, hey, instead of finding the workarounds and doing all the hack to make it work on these older JVMs, we had to keep moving forward. He does a much better job of explaining it, but it makes sense to me.
Yeah, and you know, something he says a lot too is if you do nothing else, if you take advantage of none of the new features in Spring Boot 3.0, look at all of the gains you're going to get just by moving to Java 17. You're getting all the performance benefits, all the security improvements, patches.
You should be moving to Java 17, whether you're moving to Spring Boot 3 or not.
Exactly.
You should be moving to Java 17 regardless because of all the things that have improved in the JVM. That's the other magic, right? That's the thing that we don't really talk about, or we, sometimes we hear is like the JVM has improved so much. Just the difference between a simple hello world or your RESTful API, the performance that you get out of the newer JVMs is not trivial. It's very, very impressive, and for my workloads, the Graal just-in-time compiling is also a massive improvement over the older versions of Java. So you should be moving towards Java 17 at a minimum, anyways.
All right, so we had Spring Developer.
Yeah, that was me saying like there's the difference. So
gotcha.
Let's revisit that. There, as of October 21st, when the RC1 came out, there were still 2 issues, and that's the link. There's still 2 issues that were open. I don't know the status. Clearly, we haven't had another release candidate, but I don't know the status as far as the snapshot goes. Where the build packs for image creation aren't working. But it's 2 issues that's going to be taken care of. It's not a long-term issue. There's also some changes with the newer release of the Graal VM. So we're trying to make this as easy of a transition as possible. But yeah, it's just with the build packs. So yeah, the native compilation can still happen if you have the latest native image builder for your JVM.
Cool.
So yeah, just temporary. Another question here is what are the disadvantages of native images? The big one is the cost, that upfront that you pay, and you get 0 benefit from the JVM. One of the things that just-in-time compilation does is it can say, hey, I see that this workload is always going to perform this way, so let me ignore that code. At runtime, you with a native image, you get what you get. It's going to say, yep, it's static, it cannot change at runtime, and the performance will be consistent. On the JIT side, you can actually improve performance after you warm up, after you understand what's going on. So
yeah, and just to back up, in case people didn't know what you were talking about, the upfront cost is to build the native image. So when you go into an app and you're ready to build that native image, That can take, a minute, minute and a half, 2 minutes, whatever, depending on the size of the application, the machine you're building it on. But again, this isn't something as a developer you're going to be working with all the time, right? Like you're just writing your code, you're running it normally, you're testing it locally. When you push your code, probably have some CI CD pipeline that is going to actually build that native image for you and push it out to wherever it needs to go.
Yep. Another one that we already discussed. So I'm going to pull this up. There is a guide on using GraalVM with Spring Boot 2. So this is the Spring Native, the experimental, but the concepts are the same. Let me add that. I can still use the GraalVM. I can do it with just in time and get that performance boost, or I can do the ahead of time compilation. What are the trade-offs? The trade-offs are, let's take a look. Hey, we did the install with Get Your Native Image Builder. When I do the compile, just in time compiling, I can do Maven Spring Boot run, and I can be up and running in a second. If I do that same thing down here on the ahead of time compilation, it took 5 minutes and 23 seconds on my computer to get that native image. That's a massive difference. You're not going to, during your development cycles, your iteration cycles, you're not going to do, you're not going to take that cost. You're not going to take that hit. And the other part of that is this build that I did on this guide was on that other computer, an Intel computer. My main computer is an ARM64 machine. So that image that I generated, that native image I generated, will only work on that operating system, which was Darwin and Intel CPU architecture. So I'd have to do that for both. That's another one of those trade-offs. So there is a guide over on Tanzu Developer Center. This is for your workloads running Spring Boot 2.7 and that experimental Spring Native dependency. But all of the things that you get in the Spring Native experimental dependency, those are baked in. Those are part of it. There's no extra anything you need. You get it out of the box with Spring Boot 3.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully be able to show off a demo of that today. But once you go to start.spring.io, you're just picking Spring Boot 3 RC1. You don't need to pick Spring Native. In fact, I don't think it'll let you. So all of that, the plugins, the AOT processing, that all happens out of the box now, which is really cool. Is Java 17 supported by cloud providers already? So this really depends, right? Like, I know from a serverless function standpoint, if you're going to use their images, I was doing some testing on AWS and they're still on 11. But again, that's if you're using their runtimes. In this case, maybe I wanted to compile down to native. I'm basically bringing my own runtime, so I could basically use that if I wanted to. I don't know what that looks like across the board, but
Azure just made an announcement recently where they are supporting Java 17, and I want to find it.
Nice.
Let me see if I can find that. But yeah, you explained it very well. Like if you're using their stacks, their things, yeah, there's a little bit of a gap. Very similar to Kubernetes, right? These are both open source. Yeah, you kind of get to pick. And then the nice thing is you can still use Java. You can still, you're not having to change too much if you're going from 8 to 17 or 11 to 17. As long as where you're landing it is supported, you're going to be in good shape.
Cool. All right. I think we caught up on a lot of stuff. I'm going to share my screen and we're just going to go through a couple things real quick. Then we can maybe get into some other stuff. So I just wanted to bring up, as our banner is in the background here, Spring 1 is happening a little bit over a month from now in San Francisco. The reason we're on this website is the full schedule has been released. So if you head over to the schedule, you can see everything that is going on. I don't know if you saw this, DaShaun. Do you see that first item, 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 a.m.?
That's awesome.
Yes, the San Francisco City running and walking tour. So if you want to run or walk on Wednesday, Wednesday morning and get a little tour of San Francisco, get a little exercise in. You will find DaShaun and I there. We are going to enjoy that one. So looking forward to that. But other than that, you can go in and actually see everything that's going on. So if you click on, say, beginner friendly spring, you can see what sessions are going on at what times. You can also come in here and filter by topic. So if you wanted to learn more about, I don't know, GraphQL, for instance. Oh, hey, there's a gentle introduction to Spring for GraphQL by Dan Vega. So you can go ahead and click on that and see what that talk is about. So the entire schedule is now up there. All of the speakers that we're going to have at Spring 1 are there. And man, this is just a really, really great lineup. There's Thomas, VP of Software Development at Oracle and one of the geniuses behind GraalVM. So we're going to have so much content here. Go ahead and check that out. We will put a link in the show notes as well as a $200 off coupon if you're excited about that. Oh, I see we got some spam. That's always fun.
Yeah. Sorry about
All
that.
right. So next I want to go ahead and take a look at the calendar. If you didn't know, calendar.spring.io. This is a place where you can find all the different releases for all of the projects in the Spring ecosystem. There's a little bit of a grid here. You can look at a list and just kind of find out what's going on in the Spring ecosystem. So today, as we are recording this, it is Tuesday, October 25th. Oh my gosh, it's almost November. That is crazy. So we had a couple releases yesterday, Spring Cloud release today, another Spring Cloud release tomorrow. Kind of a quiet week here. We had a lot going on last week. The big things, obviously, we got Spring Boot 3.0, RC1, Spring Framework 6, RC2, and then a bunch of projects kind of aligning with those releases, which is really great to see. So that's as far as the calendar goes. If you go over to the Spring blog, if you didn't know this was there, spring.io/blog. Spring Integration 6.0 RC1 is available. So if you are on that project, go ahead and check that out. Also, Josh does a really great job of This Week in Spring, kind of a roundup of what's happening this week in spring, as well as the show. And then I want to talk about this one. So we have Spring Boot 3.0.0 RC1 available. So Phil kind of put this blog post out there just talking about the release. This release includes 135 enhancements, document improvements, dependency upgrades, and bug fixes. So this is really the first place, if you're kind of new to Spring Boot 3, a really great place to start. Obviously, one of the big features in Spring Boot 3 is the GraalVM native image support. This release also completes our migration to the Jakarta EE9 in our baseline upgrade to 17. So those are two base upgrades that we're going to take a look at. Again, I'll create a project here in a little bit and we'll see that in action. This is really exciting. I think the Jakarta stuff is a little bit kind of flying under the radar. Not many people talking about it, but we've talked about it before. What I'm really excited about is now that this project has moved over and we are kind of baselining on Jakarta now. So that's Jakarta E9. Jakarta E10 just came out, I do believe. So we'll move to that at some point. But now this code base that's kind of been sitting around stagnant for a while is starting to get some love and some attention, and we'll see some features kind of come out of that. So we as Spring developers will get a lot of the benefits there as well. So great place. Go ahead and check out the release notes if you want to find out what's going on. This, so here's some of the things going on in, somebody brought that up earlier. Unfortunately, using BibTeX doesn't just work with applications that use Netty. So this is a great place to kind of look at some of the comments that are coming out of this to see what's going on. With that, it will link to the documentation for building or developing your first native application. So it walks through like, hey, here's what a simple application looks like. Here's the command that you can run. So you're switching on to a native profile. You're using the same Spring Boot Maven plugin or Gradle plugin. The goal is the same as before. Hey, we're just building an image, and that will go ahead and build your native image for you. So some great documentation around GraalVM native images if this is your kind of first foray into that. So with that, we have start.spring.io, one of our favorite places on the internet. One thing that I noticed, and I saw a bunch of people commenting on, if you notice, Gradle is now by default selected. I saw a bunch of people either happy or angry about this. Anytime you change something, people have very one-sided stances on things. So if you don't want to use Gradle, you can use Maven still. Just a click. So we're using Java. We're using Maven. You want to pick 3.0 RC1 here. Fill in the information about your project. Again, the default here is 17. We want to make sure we're on 17. I'm going to build just a simple application here that uses web. We'll say data JPA, and we'll say H2. And with that in place, I can go ahead and generate this project. And I will open this up in IntelliJ. And I'm not going to show off a lot of interesting things here. I just want to kind of show off just a couple of things that stick out to me. So again, when we jump into the Palm here, again, we're using 3.0.0 RC1. We are using, in fact, Java 17. So we're getting all that great support features from Java 17. Now we can use things like multi-line strings and records and all kinds of fun stuff, as well as all the performance improvements. So that's great to see. Another thing I want to point out here is if we go in here, let's just create, let's say, a new Java class. Let's say we were creating a new model. Maybe this is like a blog API that we're building out. So I'm going to go ahead and create an article class. And in this class, so this is a Spring Data JPA application. So we might mark this with @entity. And as you can see right away, we are now using the Jakarta package. So if we go ahead and drill down into that, we can see Jakarta.persistence. And then all of the things that we're used to being in that Java X.persistence package are now over here in Jakarta. So if you're straight upgrading an application to 3, moving to Java 17 and Jakarta as the baseline is something you'll have to worry about. But as we've talked about exhaustively, everybody in the community, that shouldn't be a big deal. And actually, IntelliJ, if you're using IntelliJ, will help you with that migration. So cool. Once you have that in place, you can say @ID and @generated value, private integer ID. We may want a title. We may want a slug. And we'll need a couple constructors. We need a no-arg constructor. We need a all args constructor. Actually, we don't need an ID. We would probably generate that. And we can go ahead and have getters and setters. I love Spring Data JDBC right now because I can use records with that. But the ID does a lot of this work for me. So there we go. I have this new article class that represents a single article in our application. And again, we're using that Jakarta package. Now I can come in here and create let's just put this in another package called the repository. And in here, I'm going to make an article repository. I don't know why I have problems spelling this all the time. This is an interface, and we've talked about this before on the show, but this is another one of my favorite little features is we used to extend from the CRUD repository. Now in 3.0, we have a list CRUD repository. And all that changes is it gives us the CRUD repository, but it gives us a return type of list for things like find all. Instead of working with an iterable, I'm working with a list of something, in this case, a list of articles. So I can get a list of articles back. So I can say that this is an article and this is an integer. So now let's go ahead and just create a simple article controller. This is a REST controller. This is a request mapping with /API/articles. And now if I want to go ahead and get a list of those articles back, I can. Say return null. I need an instance of that repository. So I would say article repository, articles, and add that as a constructor parameter. And now I can just say articles.find all. That's my app. I should be able to go ahead and start it up. And if we were to go ahead and insert some data, let's go ahead and do that just for fun. So I'm going to insert some data here. I'm going to use a bean of type command line runner, and I'm going to get an instance of that article repository in here. And inside of here, I can now use, I did do that. Oh, it doesn't like that, huh? What did I do wrong here? That is a command line runner. Command line runner. Am I in the right? Yes, I am. So hold on. Articles.save, new article. And this is, we just take a title, hello world, and hello world. All right. This is, okay. So that should go ahead and save a new one. Let's go ahead and run this. There we go. If we go ahead and go to the article controller, we can generate a request here to /articles. This is and there we go. So we get our one article back. So nothing special, but I wanted to kind of show off Java 17, the Jakarta packages being used in Spring Data JPA, this fancy little list CRUD repository that is one of the smallest little additions, but just my favorite. Really nice to work with. So that's cool. So once you have this, if you wanted to, you're not going to watch me build this entire thing because, again, this is going to take some time. But if you wanted to, you can come in here and run maven-p for, hey, this is the native profile. So I want to say, hey, go ahead and switch to the native profile. Again, we're still using the Spring Boot Maven plugin or the Gradle plugin. And in this case, we are running the build image goal. So that will go ahead and do all of the things. I probably should have skipped test there too, but this is going to go through and build that native image for us. And maybe we can chat while that happens, but I don't think we want to watch me do that.
Viewers from all over the place. I am trying to install the latest version of the JDK, the native image build kit. I was hoping to run through a quick demo of using the GraalVM ahead of time compilation with Spring Boot 3. But as I mentioned before, I have an ARM and an Intel, and neither one of them are cooperating. So please.
That is important. That is important to note. It says this in the documentation. If you need to have the GraalVM JVM installed. So if I look at, oops, I don't know what's going on with my keyboard. Java version, you can see that I am using the GraalVM 22, which actually we also need 23, which is going to maybe cause me some issues on this computer. So you do need the GraalVM JVM install because it is going to run this command, this GU. And this is what you get out of the box with the GraalVM JVM. So yes, again, that's in the documentation. If you go to that blog post that we referenced before, it links to the new section in the reference documentation to explain what you need to kind of get started with this.
We have been waiting for it. We've had the early access to the kit, but most of us that are switching between versions for different architectures and platforms, we're using SDK Man. It's not an SDK Man yet, so you got to do a different install, and you got to clobber all of your SDK Man fanciness. So yeah, we've been waiting. We saw the announcement, or I saw that there was going to be an announcement from one of my new favorite people. Where is it?
SDK Man just makes our life so much easier.
Yes. But yeah, things are moving. I cannot remember her name.
Karina?
But anyway, she was doing the live stream for the announcement of 22.3.
Oh yeah, then that was probably her.
Daddy.
So yeah, things are happening, and I've got a sick kid home today.
Oh man, that's unfortunate. We did too. I just came home around lunch with a fever, so never fun.
All right. What other? Here's what I want to see. I want to see. I can come up with something magical for this, right? Like, I want to see you that are watching. I want to see you take a screenshot with your IDE next to your Spring office hours. I want you to take a screenshot. Show us what you're working. Show us that you're watching. Show us what you're working on. And I want you to put that out on Twitter, and I want you to do hashtag Spring office hours. This. And I'm going to come up with something really special for 3 of them, top 3 that we like the most. Show us what you're working on. And yeah, and we're going to make something special happen. You got to follow myself and Dan so that we can send you a message and let you know how we're going to send you something. But we're going to do something special for 3 people. Take a screenshot, show us what you're working on, show us that you're watching the show, and get that out. And we're going to make something happen. I can do that. I'm allowed to do that. I'll ask for forgiveness later.
Yeah, absolutely.
A t-shirt, a signed t-shirt, maybe.
I saw this question come up, something we have covered in the past. Again, one thing that came out of last week's conversation, DaShaun and I realized that we need to find a place for questions like this because some of these questions keep coming up and it'd be a nice place that we can just point you to answer these questions. But do you think Project Loom of upcoming Java 19 Plus release will be a substitute for Project Reactor? So the short answer, as always, is it depends. The longer answer is yes and no, probably more no. But yeah, Java 19, so in Project Loom, is adding something called virtual threads, which again is out there now. You can use it in a preview mode. You can start testing it out. There's actually a blog post over on the Spring blog by Mark Pollock on getting started with Project Loom inside of Spring. So if you want to kind of give that a test drive, check that blog post out. But yeah, it's going to solve some problems. You know, one of the problems, excuse me, with native threads is there's only so many of them, and they are resources that you are going to tie up if you're doing intense IO operations like talking to a database, talking to another service, reading, inputs, streams, etc. So those are a finite amount of resources. Project Looms adds these virtual threads, which are much faster, lightweight threads that you can go ahead and create quickly and don't take up as much resource, right? And they're not tied to native threads. So in that sense, yes, I think the entire Java community is excited about that, and we should be. But at the same time, Project Reactor, Webflux, things that we're doing in Spring with that technology, that's not the only thing it solves, right? Like it gives you, a functional style programming. It allows you to deal with things like back pressure, There's a whole bunch of other things it does besides just solve that one problem. So the answer is, yeah, I mean, yes and no. It just depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So I use Gen V to switch between Java versions on ARM. Cool. Nice shout out there.
Yeah, that's similar to like the Python env, where you can say, hey, I just want to switch. SDKman has a similar feature where I can put my, I think it's like SDKman conf file, and I can identify, hey, when I'm in this project, I'm using this JVM. When I'm in this project, I'm using this other. Again,
Yep.
the value of understanding what the JVM is doing for you and which project you're using, and you can actually bundle those in with your projects and make it really, really easy for somebody else that's using SDKman to get started and make sure that they have the right JVM.
Yeah, and that happens for you out of the box when you use something like IntelliJ on this one project. I'm using serverless and I'm using Java 11 from Amazon. Whereas on this one that I'm working on today, I'm actually using GraalVM's 22.3 or whatever. So yeah, it's in the day and age that we live in with all these different flavors of the JVM. It's important to understand how to kind of switch between those.
Yeah, that one.
I think we're adding the same one.
Yep.
Place for FAQ that's easy to point to. Maybe GitHub Pages project for office hours with discussions, questions under the project structure. Yeah, I was thinking something right along those lines. In GitHub now, under a particular repo, you can have these things called discussions, and you can have different categories for discussions. Like, hey, this is a question, so here's Q&As. And here's maybe a content discussion, like, hey, I'd like to see some content on this. That's what I've been toying around with. So we're working on it. We'll get something together here soon.
Yeah, I don't want
I would say probably after spring one. We don't want to rush something out. So we're just kind of playing around with some different ideas and hopefully we'll get something out.
We don't want it to be separate. We don't want to have a bunch of content that's just from the spring office hours. We want all of it to be shared upstream. Find a nice place for these things to happen. For the spring community, for the people that aren't showing up for office hours. We want to make sure that all that's getting shared.
Yep.
One of the other nice things about the show, it's really like continue to move on, and it's exciting. It's one of my favorite things that I'm looking forward to each week. Is we're not doing the R&D. We are testing. We're trying to learn. We're trying to figure out how to explain and teach these concepts that are coming from the amazing team that's developing Spring and doing all the work. But this office hours, your questions are being seen. We have people from the Spring team that are here. Sometimes they're answering questions. So come, bring your questions. If you don't ask your questions, we don't know what you're struggling with. And yeah, we want to help. We're here to help. We're here at your service. We want to help you. So do bring your questions. Let us know what you're working on, and hopefully we can help. I don't have all the answers. Dan's got way more than I do, but we both have Slack. We can get to the answers.
There is a question on, is there any plan to support gRPC in Spring? So I don't use gRPC a lot, but I could be wrong, but that should be supported. Is that not supported?
I don't know the answer to that.
Fairly certain that there's gRPC support. If it's not first party, maybe it's third party support.
One of the things that we talked about last week, I did get an update on. It was the Spring, the state machine. The state machine support is not going to be moved into Spring Boot 3, and I mistakenly made the comment that of course it would. It's a good project, and it would show up, but it is not moving into Spring Boot 3. So I'm glad to update here and follow up as needed. But yeah, bring your questions. We'll correct.
I'll look at that. I'll look into that one though.
Yeah, I think we had one like that last week. Let's do that. Let's write that down and make sure we get that answered.
Cool. Well, keep your questions coming. This is a couple more minutes here, but there's an opportunity to share what you're working on. Tell us what you're doing. What questions do you have? What are your struggles? These are things DaShaun and I wish we had 5, 7, 10 years ago.
Yes. Oh man, would have been so nice. I see at least one uh, screenshot, spring office hours. Thank you.
Nice.
That's awesome. Uh, I I can't zoom in and see what you're working on, but yeah, that's awesome. Um, we've been talking about getting spring to production. One of the things that I'm just trying to explore is the idea. Oh, and Benjamin's bringing it up, like GraphQL over REST. It's not either or. You can kind of do both. And Dan's got a lot of great content around that and what that looks like. One of these things I'm exploring is the world beyond the large hyperscalers and what that looks like for a Spring developer, trying to get something up and running. I know sometimes it's a lot more difficult to get a large scale cloud account, and sometimes there's some fear. Like I would hate to be that person that messes up and is spinning up instances of all the hundreds of things that are on the menu on accident and not knowing about it. But there's other options, and it's actually really, really easy to get Spring Boot apps deployed on these other clouds. So you don't have to have a Raspberry Pi running in your house 24/7. And what's coming, I've done 2 little proof of concepts with a couple of small clouds. The idea that I could have a gateway that's running Spring GraphQL that is actually making calls to these other cloud providers, these other things that are custom suited for a non hyperscaler type of a customer, or think of it as a partner. Uh, and it's really interesting the power that you can use and deploy really quickly with a few lines of uh, Terraform and a quick deployment of Spring Boot app. It's awesome. So I'm having a lot of fun with that. There are a lot of ways to get Spring to production.
Yeah, let me try and answer that. Any significant advantages over GraphQL over REST? Again, as DaShaun said, it really depends on the project you're working on. One of the things that I've found is that if you have a whole bunch of different clients talking to your application, this is where GraphQL usually shines, because and even in the case of web, it just maybe a number of different web clients talking to it. But, in the past, I found myself creating all of these tiny little endpoints to support different clients that needed data massaged in a certain way, right? So if you find yourself on a project and you start out and you create your CRUD API and you're feeling good about yourself, and then you get all these requests or issues in your ticket log there that say, hey, I need an endpoint that gives me the data like this, and I also need one that gives me the data in the shape of this. Once you start getting into that, especially when you have like mobile applications in your projects that need a lot less, that have constraints on them and maybe need less data sent back to the client, that's where GraphQL can shine, because you don't really have to start individually crafting all these responses for your different client needs. You can just set up an endpoint and say, hey, now you get to tell me exactly what kind of data you want back. So that's where I've really found GraphQL to shine.
Oh, there's a few really, really good ones here.
Could we have
This
some
is
more
it.
content on Spring for GraphQL, specifically subscriptions? Yeah, I have that in my backlog, and I will get to that. I have more than just that particular topic, but yes, there's. I'm really loving Spring for GraphQL, GraphQL Java. I've been enjoying working with it, so I will try to get some more content out on that.
Yeah, another, I think, good question that I don't know the answer to, but I would like to. I do have a really deep passion around spatial data and the things you can do from previous roles. And this is a good question. Will R2 DBC eventually support spatial data? And I want to know the answer to this. So yeah, I don't know it off the top of my head, but that's a great question. So I just wanted to highlight that to make sure we don't miss it. Um, there's another one. Yeah, hey, let's talk about this. I use Spring JDBC, native queries. What do you recommend for testing? I know you're doing a lot of work.
Sorry, I was looking at something else. I use Spring Data JDBC and I write native queries. What do you recommend for testing? Oh, I don't really have an answer for that. I don't understand what you mean by what do you recommend for testing. So in a Spring Data JDBC test, you should still be able to use the testing support that we have in Spring for that. So
Tune in
one
next
of
week.
the things that I always recommend when you're writing tests is if you can take advantage of a slice test, do it because they're faster. And we do have a data JPA slice test, so I would recommend using that. If you can't, if you can't use that for native queries, I would be surprised. So I will take that on and take a look at that. But I would say use what we have built into Spring for testing. I don't think there are many scenarios where we would have built in testing and gone, well, you can do it for this, but not that.
Yeah.
So let me look into that. But I think you should be able to use what's available there.
And I'm going to say this as well. You don't have to hold your questions until spring office hours. We put both of our Twitter handles here. We have the Spring community. We have Stack Overflow. Ask your questions. Absolutely come and ask us. But we're also looking at all the other places for questions. You don't have to wait to bring them here. But great questions. Let's plan to start a new project. This makes me smile. Defrim, I hope I'm saying that correctly. Reach out to me. I would love to help move you along in this path. I do have an example for Spring Cloud Functions, and I think I can upgrade. I'm assuming you want one for 2.7. I think I have that. I can make that available. I'd also like to get one out for Spring Boot 3. I'm going to make that a top priority for you. I want to help
Yeah.
move forward in this direction.
And this is right up what I'm working on right now. So there is, if you look at the Spring Cloud Function samples project, there are samples in there, and I believe one of those is you should be able to just switch over to 3 and I'll have to double check on that as well, but I would say in the next week or so, pay attention to my Twitter handle. I will get this article out, and part of that is me kind of playing around with pushing out some type of native image for that as well. So
Good stuff.
thank you.
Should a
Appreciate that.
microservice call another microservice from the same project directly or through a gateway? I think I need a little bit more info here.
Yeah. So I can jump in on this. So again, it kind of depends on what the architecture of your setup is. So if you have one microservice and you're just calling another microservice, fine. But if you have a set of microservices and they are kind of related and they fall underneath an API gateway, the reason you would put them all underneath the API gateway is because you want to share some of the things that you would do to each of these. Like security stands out as a big one. Like you wouldn't want to secure all of these individual microservices if they are all using the same type of security approach, right? Like you would do that at an API gateway layer. So it really depends on what, as DaShaun said, you probably need a little more context to answer that directly, but most of the time you have an API gateway layer sitting over top of your microservices because of that shared functionality. So usually you're going to call into the API gateway. Now your security happens there. Now your logging happens there, metrics gathering, that kind of stuff.
Again, geospatial, geofencing, geomapping. Yes, there's cool stuff around that. It kind of depends on what you're using. What is your backend, and we can help. Reach out. Let us know what you're working on. This is David. Let us know what you're working on. What's the backend? How can we help? Give us a little more sense of what you're doing. Most of my recent experiences around using Redis, and it's geospatial. I like things fast. So I'd be happy to help there. But yeah, let me know more and we can definitely jump in.
Yeah, and I think this is another good opportunity. This is why I'm really leaning towards something like a GitHub discussion, because somebody can post this question, then we can like extract more content. Maybe you have a Git repo somewhere that we could take a look at and
Yeah.
the exact problem you're having. So for that reason alone, that's what I'm leaning towards. And I am going to come back to this video tomorrow and pull all of these questions out. So we are going to get
Yeah.
some of these saved, and we'll come back to some of them.
Yeah, I still like that's just a fun. Like, hey, how would you tackle this? Well, I
Yeah.
might tackle it a little bit different. It's always fun. Yeah, and if we can
Yeah.
have some offline discussion, that would be, I think, valuable.
Yep. Um,
How much Java experience do I need to learn Spring Boot?
yeah, I mean, you just need to understand
Just
Java.
much. Just as much.
You have to have that foundation. So everything we do in Spring is built on kind of our knowledge of Java. So, you know, I would say beginner to a little bit more than beginner.
I'd say beginner.
Again, it really depends on what you're building too, right? Like if you just want to build a simple REST API, we could probably get you through that.
I think back to when I started my career and I started doing Java, like the things that I knew, how much I knew, it took me a long time to understand to kind of get to that 200 level.
Oh yeah.
But if I had Spring Boot way back when, I would have been doing the stuff, same knowledge, but I would have been delivering more faster going down the Spring Boot path. And I'm jealous that people that are new to Java, people that are new to Spring Boot, they don't. It is so easy to get
Yeah.
things done. Yes, there's lots of learning to be had, but you can get things done really quickly.
And I think you could kind of climbing on top of being a beginner, you can learn a lot more Java by building Spring Boot applications. So you come across these things. Hey, there's an annotation here. What is an annotation? How does that work in Java? Now you can go explore that and learn a little bit more about that. What are these functional interfaces? What are this functional style programming I'm seeing here? So yeah, as long as you have that foundation, then you could start to try to build something. Maybe you'll come into some roadblocks, but that is probably the best way to learn. You build something, you fail. Let me learn about this other thing that I just got caught up on.
Awesome. I know that we are over time. Questions are amazing. Thanks everybody for joining. Yes, this has been wonderful. And next week we have our good friend Ted Young, Jitter Ted is going to be coming. We're going to be testing with Ted. So
Testing with Ted. Oh, I'm so excited about this. Ted is an awesome live streamer. We'll get his Twitter, his Twitch. We'll get those together and share those out. He's an awesome live streamer who builds projects on live streams, and a lot of what he does is, he focuses on testing. He does a lot of TDD work with Ted. So yeah, I'm interested in talking to Ted. Like I said, philosophies around testing. I have some good questions ready to go already. Oh, and there he is. Woo-hoo. Looking forward to it, Ted. So that's already up on Tanzu Developer Center. If you go over to Tanzu Developer Center and click under TV and go to shows and find Spring Office Hours, you will see that episode is ready to go. So testing with Ted next week. We're excited about that. Thanks for agreeing to join us, Ted. Looking forward to it. DaShaun, your YouTube channel, please.
I will. I'll do that. Yeah, I'm new to this. I'm learning. But yes, there is a YouTube channel. I am pushing out content, but a lot of mine is it's really kind of rough around the edges. It's nowhere near the professional, crisp, high quality content that you deserve that you can get from Dan. I'm learning. I'm still in that process. But yeah, I would appreciate any support I can get over there. I like to do things live and kind of show the learning process along the way. So yeah, I'm a fan of live streaming. You'll see a lot of that on my channels.
All right. So before we get out of here, I just want to mention last week we talked about Spring to production. We have a repo there that is getting some issues added to it. I have not abandoned that. Just been a busy week. And again, we are getting ready for Spring 1. So a lot of our focus is on that workshop that DaShaun and I are building for Spring 1. I have a GraphQL talk at Spring 1. So if you're going to be there, please check those out. But I have not forgot about the Spring to Production. We still have a lot of content to talk to you about that. And again, we are working on a way to kind of save a place where we can push all of these questions to, not only to refer back to later, but we can start discussions about some of these things and maybe come up with content based on them. So with that, thank you for joining us today. It was another great office hours. We enjoyed the questions, appreciate your feedback, and we will see you next week.
Does our background have the registration, the Spring One info? We should probably like throw that up there.
We will need to get that up there.
Yeah, like
again, $200 off with our code. So we will get our code. Another way you can get it is over on my newsletter. I believe that's
try
up
to
there.
show that real quick. Let me grab the code, because if anybody deserves it, it's the folks that are coming here, bringing the great questions.
Yes.
Where is? I'm looking at your site because I thought it was the easiest. I thought it was on the front page of your site.
Probably right down on the third one.
Oh, here we go. Oh, here we go. I found it.
I have it. I have it too.
All right, make it happen. Because you deserve it. You deserve that
here's
code.
The code, $200 off. Who doesn't like free money? So use that code if you register for Spring 1. You get $200 off. Again, it's a little over a month away. I can't wait to, I'm really excited to present there, but I'm really excited to see everyone there back in person, the hallway track, just getting to talk to so many special people, so many talented developers. I'm really excited for that. So with that, use that code, and we will see you next week for Testing with Ted. Have a good one.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.